Welcome back to Toby's Musings. I'm out in the countryside again, not far from where I live, in a bit of a nature reserve. Very peaceful today, not very bright, but really lovely. You know, nice to be out having a walk. So, I thought today's discussions or today's musings, and these opinions are all of my own, of course, and it's a bit of a contentious, I guess, subject matter, but I wanted to talk about the actual reality, as I see it, of songs. So what is a song? This is well, as a songwriter, that's a $64,000 question, because I think the definition of what a song is different between the creators. And it's worth kind of picking that apart a little bit, you know, really trying to figure out what that really means, because for me, songs have always been stories. I think in its essence and its simplest form, a great song tells you a story and gives you information. And you hope along the way, as a creator, that the information that you're giving can elicit a number of responses. One of the key things is that you are demonstrating a point of view, hopefully in some respects making people think, and challenging conceits, for instance. Now, of course, not everyone believes that. One of the struggles I've had with co-writing, for instance, with others, has been that a lot of the time when I've been in co-writing situations, often the last thing that the songwriters I'm working with are interested in is the words. Now, I happen to believe that words are everything in songwriting. Okay, but before I get right into the minutiae of all of that, and we start getting into the debate about what constitutes and what makes up a song, let's just examine some of the I don't know, the initial concepts, I think, when you're young. Because again, it comes down to being a kind of origins thing, really, where you start, how you get your start. Now, of course, you know, the vast majority of musicians, writers, would-be rock stars, whatever you want to call it, the vast majority of your inspiration comes from your peers, comes from the people that you're listening to yourself. I think I mentioned this in the last conversation about what it means to be in a, band, the reality of being in a band. So, without a shadow of a doubt, a huge amount of songwriting when you first get going is emulating your heroes, is listening to other people's music that you admire so much, picking it apart and trying to figure out in a kind of rudimentary way what that song and how that song is constructed. What is it about? How is it put together? And that essentially, if you're like I was a terrible guitar player, it's working out the chords. It's trying to figure out within the very music, the fabric of the music, what puts it together, what it's actually made of. The process is really important, I think, because it is it's essentially a learning mechanism. It's a way of using other people's ideas to figure out how melodic structures and concepts, if you like, specifically around the chord shapes, in my case, and riffs, you know, how they make up the sum of the part. You know, the sum of the parts make up the whole of the idea, and it's a brilliant way of, without you really fully understanding, because I don't think I sat down ever with my guitar when I was 12 years old and thought, right, I'm going to work out what this song's all about. I just wanted to learn the chords or learn the idea enough to be able to play it to myself and have some fun singing that song that I was enjoying, right? Okay, so that was the initial concept, and it did take me a long time to work out, which I suspect is the same for most young writers, what it all meant, because I was obsessed with the idea, how the riff was played. You know, I wasn't really paying attention much to the actual message at the time, although oddly and kind of paradoxically, the songs that really affected me and made me sit up and take notice were, I now realise, the messages of hope and supporting the underdog and bringing clarity to my generation, if you like. So bands like, you know, Def Leppard, and at the time for me, massive one was Dio, of course, I've mentioned that many times, but also Whitesnake and, you know, and all these cool bands. Once I got beyond the sound of the guitars and the sound of the band, it was, hang on, they're trying to tell me something here. What is it? Going on from that, I started to realise, especially when I started working with other people, you know, in rooms and all the rest of it, just messing around with ideas, that there was so much more here. And also, the key thing, when I stepped away from learning other people's songs, how difficult it was to write my own. And it suddenly became very apparent that it wasn't easy. You kind of think in a strange, naive way, which is beautiful and actually should be promoted, I think. But when you're young, you're very naive to it, and you think it's going to be easy. You think, well, I could do what that guy does. I could sing what Ronnie's singing, or I could sing what you know, Freddie's written. You know, I could do something like that. But of course, you know, it dawns on you very quickly that you can't. It's not a simple thing. And it becomes a kind of, for me, it became a huge challenge. Well, how do I do this? How do I manage to find a way of talking about myself and the things I believe in a way that can be attractive to others to listen to? And that became the first, I guess, epiphanal moment. You know, I can remember sat down working on music for the very first band I was in. I think I mentioned them on the last musing. They were called Action Contraption. And it was a bunch of them. We swallowed a fly. Well, in these times of austerity, a little bit of protein, right? Anyway, yeah, so I sat down with my friends, or went into this little caravan that we used to work in, and messed around with some song ideas. And I think the epiphanal moment for me really was that once I'd realised that the initial jumping off point can be someone else's song, what it then led to was almost like a rewriting. That's putting it kind of politely, I guess, rather than plagiarism, but kind of rewriting of that song. I was 12, 13, so I was very young. But what it did was it made me realise that you can use inspiration, you can use through what we would call through the prism of somebody else's material to stimulate you and inspire you to write something of your own. So moving forward, after those initial years of trying again and writing some kind of essentially what were rip-offs of other people's music, which was my learning period. Didn't really know that really at the time. I was just, I can remember feeling incredibly frustrated that I couldn't write, you know, My Stairway to Heaven or My Black Knight or my whatever, you know, my Queen song, Bohemian Rhapsody, you know. And it was, I remember it being a source of massive frustration, but I persevered and I went through the whole of my secondary school education. I guess, you know, like I said before, mentioned this before, I suffered quite a lot of bullying at school. And weirdly, now I've got a huge distance from it. It's 40 years later, I realised how much that weirdly helped me. It kind of gave me this sort of sense of, I guess it was trauma to deal with, absolutely. But also the conflict, that daily conflict that I felt, filled the reservoir in a kind of way that I didn't expect, and only started to emerge when I was in a far better, more mature place. And even though I wasn't fully, I think I've been a bit of a late developer emotionally, to be fair. I think some of that kind of emotional development was stunted because of the bullying, actually, if I'm being honest. But I think when, say for instance, when Little Angels got our record deal and we were working with some very serious people, I started to feel a need, very much a need, to discuss in a guarded way, in this kind of closed way really, internalised way, some of these subjects and some of the things I've been through. And so very quickly, for a very short, in a short space of time, I went from, I think, feeling quite, I guess, not very confident about writing songs, and I absolutely wanted to do it within the band setting. We did a lot of co-writing within Little Angels when we were Mr. Thrud, and then when we were Little Angels in the rehearsal room. So Bruce would bring a riff, or I'd bring a title or something, and we'd do it kind of together. So tracks like Sex in Cars, Better Than the Rest, you know, all of these, you know, those sort of songs. Pleasure Pie, I remember, classic one. That's a classic example of ripping something off. That was from Van Halen's OU812 record. We just wanted to do something like Finish What You Started, you know. So that became the groundwork for that, and then we took it and did our own thing with it. There's a good example of it, you know. But I had a flush of, maybe it's a bit of a silly I think it's a bit of a silly phrase, but a kind of an epiphanal moment, meaning you don't know where it comes from, you don't know what it is, but it's visited upon you. And I wrote Big Bad World and No Solution pretty much in one weekend, or over the course of, say, 2 weekends, you know, thinking about it and going, and they popped out of kind of nowhere. And again, Big Bad World, here's a good example. Absolutely inspired by God Bless Video by Alcatraz. The speed, the tempo, not the idea though. So I started off listening to that record and listening to that song. I absolutely love that song, and trying to learn it. Because I'm not a very good guitar player, I couldn't really work it out. But therein lies the beauty of that, is that because I'm not great, and because I can't really work it out to its in its finer points, I was approximating it, and inevitably, there's that word again, it led to me conjuring something of my own, which was not like that song at all. And so that was a jumping off point, but it was different. All of a sudden, I can remember writing the words in a fevered kind of like sort of atmosphere in my bedroom at the time. I was still living at home, and all of a sudden these words, about quite a comedic edge to the song, of course, quite comedy, but humorous, a kind of wry view on how I thought that the world was in a bit of a rubbish state, and how, you know, how it was impacting on me. Now, it's, when you read the words, it's not all that, it's not incendiary particularly, but it's got a great title, Big Bad World. It was something that, you know, was being said, people say it, it's a common phrase. And I started to make these connections, that finding those connective tissue moments between the things that we all know and we all believe in, or we have at least some connection to in normal life. Those were the essential ingredients of creating a song that could connect beyond just my own opinion. So let's just address one really important aspect of songwriting here for me. This is for me, and like I say, I don't want to for 1 second come on this bit of video and try and pretend that I have got all the answers. I absolutely haven't. Let me just make that absolutely clear. This is just the way that I do it. And absolutely, there are no rules about writing songs. There is no rules surrounding making music. It is an emotional, human experience that nobody has the right to lay claim to. Now, in terms of like knowing how to do it best, you know, it is entirely in the ears. Beauty is in the ears of the beholder, and all the rest of it, as a very wise man said once. So yes, let's just get one thing straight about this. Because it is such a unique experience to each writer, because you have your own internalized, deeply important kind of like cave, if you like, a writer's cave, where you're starting to figure out the kind of person you are, the experiences you've had, and how your life is unfolding. It becomes, I found it, something deeply entrenched in my psyche that bubbles up. The only way I can describe it is it kind of bubbles up through, I guess, being stimulated by something that's happening in my life, around me, to other people. I'm being affected by the TV, by stuff that I hear people say, stuff on social media here. Obviously, it's a big one these days, of course. But what it does is, and I'll go back on this in a bit later on, but it bubbles up, and all of a sudden, within a very short space of time, I'll get an idea. And the biggest trick about this really is understanding that songs are not simply banging a bunch of chords together, having a kind of, I don't know, a lack of interest in the words, and just somehow glossing over the surface and hoping that you'll get away with it. It is so much more than that. It is an intense personal experience, I found, that takes you over. That when it's right, when you get one of those really great ideas, you simply can't escape it. It is in your head all the time. You have to get it out. It is a catharsism in many ways. It's a way of expressing yourself and your worries and your fears and your anxieties through an art medium. But you kind of don't know that's what's happening. It's the oddest feeling. Respects, I think it's probably a good way of answering the question about what is songwriting, by answering the things I don't personally believe it is. Songwriting isn't a riff. Songwriting isn't a drum groove. Songwriting isn't a production style. Songwriting isn't sonics. Songwriting isn't, you know, an arrangement. Those are all parts of the puzzle, but they're not the song. The song, in my opinion, exists in the message, in what you're trying to say, and how that then becomes translated in the very music that you create. Now, of course, then the riff comes. Your songwriting idea might start with a riff, but the riff is not the song. It's a recognizable hook, but that isn't the song. For me, the song is the stuff that you're talking about, the stuff that comes out of your mouth. Because I can tell you now, if you gave exactly the same song or same arrangement of riffs and chords to 100 different songwriters, you would get 100 different songs. And then it would be down to whether the song was strong enough, the inherent sense of the song within that structure was which one was the most potent, that made the most amounts of sense, that managed to tie itself in the best way to all of the other elemental things. But in reality, take away the words, take away the melody, because obviously melody is massively important. That's next to the word, that's next to the lyrics, in my opinion. If those two things don't combine and don't sit on top of that chord structure or that arrangement, you've got nothing anyway. I know my statement about riffs and all that not being a song will be a debate forever and ever and ever. Of course, you know, there are some incredible songs that have an inherently brilliant riff, you know, Smoke on the Water, you know, All Right Now, you name them, there's thousands and thousands of them. But again, you know, it's part of it. It's not the essential nature of it, I don't believe. It just enhances it and it becomes part of it. But you know, that riff on its own, Smoke on the Water on its own, without the song, without the idea, without Ian Gillan telling us the tale, what is it? I'm not willing to decry anyone's approach. If your approach personally is that writing a riff and coming up with nonsensical words or words that you're not really bothered about the words, if that's what you believe a song is, then that's fine too, you know. What I'm interested in more than anything else is just the way that people, you know, demonstrate an idea. Really, ultimately, you know, that's what it's about. It's about being creative and wanting to tell the world that you are and show the world that you are. But I would just urge anyone that feels like that to look a bit deeper into the things that you're trying to say. What things really matter to you? It can't just be the sound of your guitar. What's going on in your life? What makes you happy? What makes you sad? What do you believe in? And if you can find a way of combining those really, really important subject matters, whatever they may be, then you'll be onto something. And here's another little bit of a rule as well. Someone said this to me years ago, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. Sing about the small stuff. Don't sing about the massive, wide, huge, enormous, overarching concepts. Because if you sing about something small and really personal to you, you'll begin to dig into the reality of what it means to you. And then ultimately, because we're all pretty much the same, we all have the same anxieties, same experiences in lots of ways. That sort of very clever, nuanced, personal view will become very apparent and very important to the listener, you know. And then it reveals the bigger world. You know, singing about something small can actually reveal the entire universe. Let's get back to the nuts and bolts, okay? Now, one of the things I find and have found very frustrating about the modern music business, and I say that with, you know, with a level of pretty serious experience. I've worked with some huge co-writers, some massive names, Jim Vallance, you know, Dan Reed, all kinds of incredible people that, you know, Hugh Cornwell, another great example from the Stranglers, who gave me an insight into their world, and it was an extraordinary experience. And again, I think this might be something to do with the time. Little Angels were one of the very last bands of our generation to kind of have the opportunity and the privilege of being signed to a major record label where money was no object, where we could develop ourselves, we could become something. There was no necessarily huge amounts of pressure, but we were putting ourselves under pressure to create great music. But it was a machine, make no bones about it. The record industry is a fucking huge industry, and the industry at that particular point was flushed with money. It was all about spending their way into success, if you like. Not entirely, because obviously you had to be I'd like to believe that we were talented enough for them to want to sign us, which I think was the case. I think we were demonstrating songs. I think No Solution, as I mentioned that early on, that's a really good example, because we demoed that song many times with many different record labels, and it was always on the table as being an example of one of the songs that would, I think ultimately helped us get a record deal. Now, I didn't know why that was at the time, but I now realise it was because a lot of the bands that were making music, because there was a lot of guitar rock around, getting signed, especially coming from America, it was something slightly different. It wasn't the kind of bubblegum, for want of a better description, bubblegum, largely misogynist male, white male rock and roll that a lot of bands were churning out. It was something with a bit of heart and a bit of soul. And I think it definitely made the difference for us. It has to be a spark. There has to be a vision. I've talked about this word a lot, and it's really important. You can't do anything in the art world correctly with any success without having a clear vision of what you want and of what it means. And I think my songwriting developed at a really stratospheric rate from the sort of middle period of Little Angels, when we were beginning period of Little Angels, when we were on the cusp of getting signed. And I was hugely inspired and felt empowered by the fact that people like MCA and, all these huge labels, Polygram, at the time, Polydor, they were all coming to see us play, and we were meeting with these executives. So I started to feel very confident that even though I didn't fully understand why, that wasn't a fly that time, even though I didn't fully understand why, it was clear something was happening. Clear some message was getting through. Yes, of course, a lot of it was the fact that we were young, some would say reasonably decent looking lads. I hope we were. But we had a thing. We were out there playing, doing lots of gigs. We were building our following. But really, a following is only as good as the songs that you create and the vibe that you create within those gigs, and how people can then sort of listen to the music afterwards and can stay inspired. So I do think we had that. So, I was in an entirely different place by this point, and it really bolstered my confidence, and I really felt, okay, this is my place. I feel like I belong to this business, and I was inspired and cajoled, if you like, by the very nature of the pressure. So that really, really helped propel me into writing better material. Now, I suppose what I'm trying to say here is, I don't believe that songs and songwriting is some kind of factory process. I've been in many, many, many co-writing situations and settings where you're sat there with people in a room staring at a computer, and no one's got any idea, but somebody will pick up a beat loop or something like that and mess around with a kind of tried and tested, well-trodden, sort of bass line or something that you've heard a million times before, chuck a few chords on it, and everyone's expected to pitch in. Now, it's never worked for me. I've found the whole experience just so empty and so completely without any value to me. Because I get inspired with an idea, and I want to take it to somebody and get their help to bring that idea out. I just don't believe that you can stare at the carpet, like we call it, staring at the carpet. I don't believe you can stare at the carpet and sort of somehow conjure something from the ether. I mean, there are people that can do that. I don't know if you've watched the Get Back documentary about the Beatles and the making of Let It Be, and you see Paul McCartney literally conjuring a song from the air, and it's an extraordinary thing to watch. But I would argue that even McCartney probably did that out of pure frustration. I mean, if you watch that documentary, it's a very fascinating, I guess, sort of, discussion on what it means to be in a band, what it means to be in one of the biggest bands in the world, if not the biggest band ever to exist, and how those pressures were being applied, and how McCartney was the driving force, and how the rest of the guys, even though they were there, and George was doing his thing, and Ringo was always present, Lennon was the clown, there was a lack of sort of impetus. There was a sort of like striding through mud, trying to get things going. And I think because Paul McCartney was a kind of really endeavoured songwriter, where it was flexing through him all the time, and it was always bubbling to the surface. I got the impression that he just felt very frustrated, and he was, you know, within that frustration, therein lies the wellspring of inspiration, for instance, you know. Ultimately, it's a very personal experience, but I don't believe songs are, like I say, a manufactured process. Pop music can be manufactured. There are people that are brilliant at it. There are people I've worked with. I worked with a guy called Elliot Kennedy who wrote an awful lot of songs for the Spice Girls and people like that. And Elliot was a complete enigma to me. I went and worked with him for 2 or 3 days, and his processes were so completely counter to what I do, you know. I mean, I can sit around with a guitar these days and pretty much come up with anything. It'll probably be pretty useless, but I've taught myself through the process of over 36 years, nearly 40 years of songwriting. I've learned about myself. I understand how I work, and that becomes a really important tool, because the moment things start to go wrong, meaning that you kind of cannot conjure something, or you've got an idea and it doesn't go anywhere, one of two things can happen. You can put the brakes on. It can become a sort of terrorizing situation where you just think, I'm not any good anymore, and the whole imposter syndrome thing kicks in. Or, like I do, I've learned to simply put the guitar down, turn the computer off, turn off my phone, whatever it is I'm recording it on, and walk away and come back another day. Because part of the thing is if you get yourself entrenched in what I would call wallowing in, you know, the sort of the mire of it all, in self-pity, you don't get anywhere. So part of the process is knowing when not to pick the guitar up or when to put it down. I mentioned this is something very personal and very private, a very unique. Every writer is unique. But I just want to, in summary, talk about what I really feel it is. And if there's any inspiring songwriters out there listening to me, you may not know who I am. You may know who I am and think I'm a useless songwriter. You might be a fan. I don't know. But I would like just to proffer the following. To truly be artistic in any form, in my opinion, is to find a place where you can free up your mind. You have to be able to say to yourself and be part of a world where you allow anything to happen. And you have to be accepting of that. You have to be brave enough to allow ideas to happen and not poo-poo them and get rid of them immediately, because this is one of the big problems. When I was a kid, if I came up with an idea, and often because I started to become aware of the fact it was often inspired by someone else's chord progression, I'd often just dismiss it and put it away. Now here's the thing, quite often the first instinctive idea you have is the strongest it will ever be. So part of the process is being brave enough to not dismiss it, to put it onto your phone or into a computer or however you're storing these ideas, and allow it to settle. Because I'll guarantee you, when you listen back to all of those ideas, the ones that are still strong enough, that still have that resonance, that still feel great, they will still be there. And the ones that really don't have much, quite often are the ones you think are great to start with, in some respects, you know, they will disappear. So it's a question of quality over quantity, but you need the quantity first. I have found that when I start to write in sessions, say for the Wayward Sons albums, I will have weeks where nothing happens. Then I might have a week or two where I literally cannot turn the tap off. And I think that what that is, it's about this opening up your mind, allowing for any possibility, not putting the brakes on, not saying, I can't do that. That isn't what I'm about. These things don't mean anything to me. Let it all out. Let it be something in you. Embrace it. Embrace the fear of getting it wrong. Get it wrong. Learn from getting it wrong. Figure out why it's wrong or why you think it's wrong, because maybe it isn't. So it's very much an emotional position. It's a very emotional situation, I think. And that is as clear as I can explain it, because there aren't really any answers to it. There's only your own answers to it. I'm trying to say here is, let yourself go. Be brave and don't discount anything. And here's another thing, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It is not anyone else's opinion how you work. No one can say, I am better than you. There is no better, there is just different. Now, of course, it's about self-analysis and getting better at the project and better at the process. And that happens over a long period of time. Because I think here's another thing. If you want to be a songwriter, you've got to do it every day. You've got to pick that guitar up, or turn that piano on, or pick that bass up, or pick those drumsticks up even. And you've got to do it every day. Even if nothing happens, even if you sit down and play for 15 minutes and nothing occurs, what you're really doing is establishing a kind of continuation in your psyche, in your mind, in your imagination, that continues. And eventually what you're really doing is your brain and your subconscious is filtering everything in your daily life, everything that you're encountering, it's being filtered. That filtering process eventually will reach a kind of natural conclusion. And the next minute, rather than sat there playing the same 3 chords you play every single day, those 3 chords will turn into absolute gold and magic. But it is a long-term process. Don't give up. My advice is, and it's very, very simple, nobody knows anything. No one can tell you how to do it. You've got to figure it out for yourself. And nobody's right, nobody's wrong, like I say. So you've just got to keep working it, keep working at it. Because believe me, that's what eventually will turn you into something. Understanding yourself, figuring out what you want to say. Because here's the point, you've got to have something to say. It's no good, I say to bands whenever I work with bands in the studio, what are you here for? What do these songs mean? What is your principal driving force? It can't just be because you want to own a Marshall stack and a Les Paul and wear the right clothes. That stuff is immaterial. The only thing that matters, there are 3 things that matter in the music business and being a songwriter. It's the songs, and the songs. That's it. There is nothing else. Get the songs right, get that focus right, get an idea right, get the narratives right, and you will have absolutely everything. Now, here endeth the lesson. I really hope you get something out of this. I know it sounds confused a little bit in places because I am that kind of character, as you well know, but therein lies the rub of being a writer and being artistic. There are no answers. I can remember, just as a final thing, an anecdote. I can remember when we were in Japan with Little Angels and we were sat down having interviews with a Japanese journalist. I forget what magazine it was. And the Japanese journalist literally said to me, "How do you write songs?" And I didn't know what to say. I couldn't answer it. I genuinely still can't answer it. And I said to this journalist, "I really can't explain." But this journalist kept pushing me and kept saying, no, how do you write songs? And I think what this person wanted was a formula. You know, what's your formula? What's your thing? Now, even though I could say, you know, I could answer that question to a certain degree in small ways, the reality is, I couldn't answer it. It's an ethereal, magical, completely unknown, some would say vaguely spiritual. I'm not certain about that, but I know what they mean. It's a very, very, very human thing to do, to want to talk about the world around us and our experiences and how they just might help somebody else. That's the way I look at it. So yeah, drop your comments in below and let me know what you think about this, and thanks for watching.